Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarians. Tēnā koutou nā manuhiri. No mai, haere mai ki tēnei whare karakia. A te atua, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. We welcome you into the space made sacred by Auckland Unitarians for 118 years. Holy and beautiful is the custom by which we gather together on this Sunday morning. Here we come to give our thanks, to face our ideals, to remember our loved ones, to seek that which is authentic, and to serve integrity, beauty, and the qualities of life that make it rich and whole. Through this hour, breathe the worship of all the ages, the sacred music of all history, music of all history. Blessed are the ears that hear that eternal sound. Come, let us worship together. And afterwards, let us join together for morning tea. It is our sacrament of hospitality. Please join us. It won't be complete without you. My opening words are from Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson. Truth always comes in pairs. One has to endure this to accord with reality. But we often refuse this paradoxical nature of reality and think we can function outside it. If we try to embrace one side without paying tribute to the other, we degrade paradox into contradiction. Fanaticism is always a sign that one has adopted one of a pair of opposites at the expense of the other. The high energy of fanaticism is a frantic effort to keep one half of the truth at bay while the other half takes control. Both of a pair of opposites must be equally honored. If we endure the collision of opposing elements in full consciousness, we embrace paradox. The religious faculty is the art of taking the opposites and binding them back together again, surmounting the split that has been causing so much suffering. We must restore the word religious to its true meaning when it will regain its healing power. To heal, to bond, to join, to bridge, to put back together again. These are our sacred faculties. The religious faculty helps us move from contradiction, that painful condition where things oppose each other, to the realm of paradox where we are able to entertain simultaneously two contradictory notions and give them equal dignity. And then and only then is there the possibility of grace, the spiritual experience of contradictions brought into a coherent whole, giving us a unity greater than either one of them. To stay loyal to paradox is to earn the right to unity. Conflict to paradox, to revelation, that is the divine progression. Though our knowledge is incomplete, our truth partial, and our love imperfect, we believe that new light is ever waiting to break into our hearts and minds, to enlighten our common path. That there is mutual strength in willing cooperation, and that the bonds of love keep open the gates of freedom. I confess to being cursed. In case you haven't noticed, I'm definitely not swimming in the mainstream. It may explain why I've ended up a Unitarian where atheists go to church. Contradictions, which lead me to paradoxes, mesmerize me. What could be more exciting than when two opposing, irreconcilable truths seek to occupy the same space? What could possibly go wrong when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Well, sometimes a clear right or wrong answer to life's immutable questions would be comforting. They smell to me like a bottle of snake oil to cure all my ills that has passed its use-by date. The rising hair on the back of my neck warns me that life is just not that simple. I blame this in part to bad parenting. While my dad prepared dinner, I would frequently help him. Being a teenager, certain of my view of the world, knowing ever so much more at 16 than I do at 70, I would make some pronouncement about a world event, a person, a belief. It really didn't matter what, but the game was on. Dad would then ask me a series of questions. By the time I'd answered them, my position had often shifted 180 degrees. That would have been fine if the game was over, leaving me in certainty of my new position. Oh no. He would then start questioning my new position, leading me back to my original premise, or sometimes to a new one altogether. It was exasperating. Why couldn't he just leave me in a safe black and white, right or wrong world? A life without contradictions would be so much easier to navigate. That would be especially true if so many of those contradictions didn't reside within me. Just one of many examples. I believe in free speech, and I believe hate speech has no place in civil discourse and should be prohibited. So how do we live in such a world? Dr. Warren Weaver, a scientist, mathematician, and educator, offered a way out in his book, The Religion of a Scientist. Weaver's approach to religion was influenced by a principle from physics called the principle of complementarity. This principle, by Danish physicist Niels Bohr, originally described the nature of the elementary units of light, electrons and photons. Under some experimental conditions, these elementary units behaved as though they were discrete particles. But under other experimental conditions, they behaved as though they were flowing waves. So which was correct? Were they particles or were they waves? To the conventional physicists, they could not be both. They had to be either one or the other. But Niels Bohr said they were both. He said that the observer and the circumstances of the observer make a difference. What you need to understand the nature of light, he said, is a principle of complementarity. Under some observational circumstances, the units of light must be considered as particles. And under other circumstances, they must be considered as waves. Both sets of information, he said, even though they contradict each other, must be accepted as equally valid. Niels Bohr said that by accepting the two contradictory descriptions and viewpoints, you have a more complete picture of light than you do with either one alone. In other words, the two separate viewpoints both contradict and complement each other. And one must learn, he said, to live with the contradictory viewpoints and to see them as complementing each other, even though at first it may strain and pain the rational mind to do so. Then Weaver took this principle from physics and he applied it to religion, saying that in religion too, if I ask a question from one point of view, I will have one answer. But sometimes if I ask the same question from another and quite different point of view, I may very well have a second answer. The second answer may be inconsistent with the first, but it can be viewed as complementing the first, even though it's contradictory. So, for example, Weaver said that when he asks himself about the nature of God or ultimate reality from two different points of view, he receives two very different answers. When he asks the question within an impersonal intellectual framework, then he finds it satisfying to say that God represents the impersonal law, order, and design of things, which runs on its own, a kind of deistic concept of God. On the other hand, said Dr. Weaver, when he is frightened or when he is concerned about the safety of his loved ones, or when he's wrestling with personal problems, or when he is emotionally moved by a well-remembered hymn, that his view of God is paradoxically different. God, then, is no longer impersonal design and law, but rather God is personal being, the ever-dependable friend, the loving and protecting parent. Weaver says that these two concepts seem inconsistent and contradictory, but they arise from mutually exclusive circumstances and can be viewed as complementary. We don't have to choose one to the exclusion of the other. And that, he says, provides him with a richer, more complete, and more deeply satisfied approach to life, an approach that both liberates and sustains him. Our famous Unitarian forebear, Ralph Waldo Emerson, has a passage in his essay, Self-Reliance, that echoes Weaver's position. Emerson writes, "In your metaphysics, you have denied personality to the deity. Yet when the devout motions of the soul come, yield to them heart and life, though they should clothe God with shape and color. Leave your theory, as Joseph his coat in the hand of the harlot, and flee. A foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds." The principle of complementarity requires a willingness to let seemingly opposing and contradictory positions dangle in my mind and not feel compelled to try to reconcile them into one overall consistent system, or decide for one over the other, but instead to try to hold up and maintain the values of each position. And now let me expand on this principle by making 4 comments about it, beginning with the difference between truth and consistency. Namely, the notion of truth is not necessarily to be logically consistent. And to be logically consistent is not necessarily to discern truth. Of course, the logical, rational part of our being and brain would like to bring everything into its orbit and under its control. The rational mind would like to believe that reality could be understood in a completely logical and consistent way. It would seem, however, that reality is not susceptible of being captured by the rational part of ourselves in this way, and that attempts to do this can be personally frustrating, and beyond that, even damaging and disastrous in the larger world. Author G.K. Chesterton argues that sanity consists in not worrying over much about consistency. He says that ordinary persons tend to stay sane because they care more for truth than they do for consistency. Ordinary persons, Chesterton says, if they see 2 truths that seem to contradict each other, take the truth and the contradiction with them, rather than throwing out one of the truths. Their vision, he says, is stereoscopic or binocular. They see 2 different pictures at once, but they don't block out one of those pictures. They keep both of them somehow in view, and they are healthier and larger for it. On the other hand, Chesterton points out that the extreme inconsistency can be found among those suffering from certain mental illnesses. He says that if you argue with certain disturbed minds, you may well get the worst of it. For sometimes one of the characteristics of the disturbed mind may be extreme consistency, a tremendous ability to connect one thing with another in an elaborate maze with which it is impossible to keep up. The same is true of certain religions and philosophies that seem to have all the answers to all the questions of life. Given their point of view and premises, they may be ever so consistent and able without hesitation to respond to every question that life throws our way. Now, you may feel that there's some error in a given system. It may feel way off to you, but try to pinpoint the error in logic, and you may be hard-pressed to do so. For again, the problem is not one of consistency, but of size. The system is too small, and the point of view too narrow. The system has reduced itself in size to achieve consistency. It has chosen consistency over reality and certitude over doubt. It has chosen to be airtight and thus suffers from lack of air. And if on occasion you find yourself suffocating and struggling for air, or find yourself becoming defensive and rigid, or even a little paranoid, perhaps it's because of your mental outlook. You're trying to be too consistent. Perhaps your system needs to breathe a little. Perhaps it needs a little more air, a little less concern about consistency, and a lot more concern about reality. Reality is larger than any system that attempts to make sense of it, larger than our notion of consistency, larger than our rational, logical faculty, larger than our intellect. The second comment has to do with the role of intellect in our life. Simply this, that the intellect is to be a servant, not a master. This is not to say that the intellect, our rational faculty, is unimportant or that we are free to be sloppy in our thinking. The intellect is our distinguishing human attribute, our great human gift, and we must strive to use it well. Its function, role, and value are to be a tool or instrument to help us find our way through life, and perhaps beyond that, to be a servant of life itself. The ideas and concepts that the intellect comes up with and works with are also tools. And like tools, they need to be sharpened when they have become dull or replaced when they have been worn out. Just think about how many ideas, concepts, and beliefs your rational brain has come up with and is worn out over the course of your lifetime. Think how many beliefs you have believed, how many opinions you have held, how many positions you have defended. They may be ideas and beliefs that once served you well, beliefs that were important to you, but how have they changed, how they shift, how they wear out, how they lose their importance, how they may need to be let go of as one makes one's life journey. Take, for example, your childhood idea of Santa Claus. For so many children, Santa Claus is a very important and valuable figure. Children everywhere love Santa Claus, and he serves them so well. But then there comes the time in a youngster's life when Santa Claus needs to be let go of and taken in a new and different way, in a way that would seem to contradict and be inconsistent with the former idea and image. The new understanding of Santa, now as a mythological figure, can be viewed as complementary to one's first literal understanding. It's not necessary to call the former idea false or to belittle it from a present superior position. It was true to that age and to the experiences, needs, and circumstances of that time. My point is that our ideas, concepts, and beliefs are tools for us, conceived by the intellect, to help us make our way through life. And we need a whole lot of concepts and beliefs to make it through a whole lifetime. Who knows what beliefs, ideas, and concepts you may yet come to find helpful for you. These are tools for finding our way as we build and build. Idea complements idea. Thought builds upon thought. Sometimes we need to remodel. Sometimes we need to retool. And there's no need to be embarrassed by our past or to beat up on ourselves for what we may now regard as worn out or childish ideas. A third thing the complementary approach can do is to open us to the value of what is rejected by one idea. The intellect tends to work by setting one thing against another, perhaps necessarily so. The intellect says yes to one proposition and no to another. It conquers by dividing. Do we have free will, or are we determined? Are we products of nature, or are we products of nurture? Is the universe purposeful, or is it purposeless? In pursuing one of these pairs of opposites, the truth of the other side tends to get rejected and neglected. But what about that which is rejected? We have little sayings that try to correct this one-sidedness, such as, for every truth there is an opposite, which is also true. Or Niels Bohr puts it this way: the opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth. As Scott Fitzgerald comments, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One of my favorite plays and movies is Fiddler on the Roof. And one of my favorite scenes from it is one in which Tevye, after listening to one person's argument on a subject, says to his companions, "You know, he's right." Then a second person, directly contradicting the first, says, but that's nonsense. It's like this. And again, Tevye says, "Yes, that's right." And then a third person interjects saying, "He's right and he's right too. They can't both be right." To which Tevye sheepishly replies, "You know, you are also right." This is the complementary approach, the both and approach. If something comes along that makes sense, which is some truth in it for you, don't get too concerned. Even if it seems to contradict previous beliefs and positions, don't reject it just because it doesn't fit well into an already existing compartments of your rational mind. Simply add a new compartment, or add a new belief, or add a new category, or a new perspective. Fit the beliefs to the evidence rather than discarding the evidence simply because it doesn't fit the beliefs. Ralph Waldo Emerson would approve. Normally, we don't notice that we have two very different types of brains within our skull because the two hemispheres are connected through the corpus callosum, 250 to 300 million or more fibers connecting the two brain hemispheres. And so we don't usually experience them as contradictory or inconsistent, but as one functioning brain. So the physical brain is structured in a complementary or stereoscopic way. It creates a larger unity out of two different and often opposing processes. However, when one of the sides of our brain is injured or the connecting fibers are severed, some very interesting effects take place. The left hemisphere of the brain is the center of your personal identity, the ego center, which knows time, past, and future, and which makes distinctions, passes judgment, and so forth. But when a blood vessel in this brain, part of the brain hemorrhages and starts to close down, we begin to experience the loss of personal identity. When the left brain goes offline, we experience more fully how the right brain functions. The right brain is timeless, dwells in the present only, and is oceanic and fluid in its field. The right brain experiences itself as one with all that is. It experiences itself in the endless flow of infinite being. Philosophically, this raises the question, are we an individual identity or are we one with all that is? Our brain apparently has different approaches to this question. So for example, when people say, when you're dead, they're speaking from the perspective of the left brain, the left hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere, however, has a very different story to tell, namely that you are one with everything that is, and there's no such thing as death. My left brain thinks of me as a fragile individual capable of losing my life. My right brain realizes that the essence of my being has eternal life. The principle of complementarity says that you don't have to choose one over the other. They may seem inconsistent, but actually they are complementary. We are simultaneously capable of being one with the universe while having an individual identity. The principle of complementarity, when I practice it, tends to keep me looser, more open, more humble. When I'm prone to think that my current way of seeing and believing is the only way there is, this principle of complementarity suggests that I step back from my tightly wound ideas and rigidly wrapped self to see if there might be a way to view things as complementary rather than contradictory. As my opening reading said from Robert Johnson, where he summarizes how to live with contradictions succinctly. If you're willing and able to suffer the collision of opposites, differing ideas, differing opinions, and not close your ears or your mind or silence your opponent or flee in terror, then new revelation is possible. To stay loyal to paradoxes to earn the right to unity. Conflict to paradox, to revelation, that is the divine progression. So be it. For our meditation, I'm going to offer you 2 quotes. Take your pick. The first is by Neil Boers. No, you're not thinking, you're just being logical. And the second is by Robert Frost. Nature within her inmost self divides to trouble men with having to take sides. My closing words are from the Reverend Kendall Gibbons. There is finally only one thing required of us. That is to take life whole, the sunlight and shadows together. To live the life that is given us with courage and humor and truth. We have such a little moment out of the vastness of time for all our wondering and loving. Therefore, let be no half-heartedness. Rather, let the soul be ardent in its pain, in its yearning, in its praise. Then shall peace enfold our days, and glory shall not fade from our lives.